I played AimLab every day for 3 months. Did it help? Let's find out. Now, if you don't know what AimLab is, it's a game that helps to isolate the skills of aiming so that you can focus on and improve those skills without having to play a specific game. Some of which can be hard to really dedicate to focusing on specific aspects of aiming. When I first started, I played a short 15-minute routine, but it didn't take long for me to realize it wasn't targeting the things I wanted to focus on. So I made my own. Because of this change, there are only so many specific AimLab tasks that can be directly compared. Those tasks are 6-shot, Spidershot, SwitchTrack, CircleTrack, and LineTrack. First, it's valuable to know how we can gauge improvement. To do that, I wrote a Python script that will graph my scores for each time I use AimLab. More than that, I graphed my average scores over time. This makes it easy to see if my scores are improving over time. We'll start with 6-shot. Here's a graph of all my scores since I started. As you can see, there's been a pretty huge improvement over time. Here's another graph that tracks my average score. As you can see, there's a pretty clear climb. Next we have Spidershot. Spidershot's been one of my most played tasks over this challenge. However, the Spidershot tasks I've been doing use two different modes. One is the precision mode, and the other is the AI mode. The AI mode is significantly harder. Scores for it are significantly lower. If we look at them both in the same graph, it makes it a lot harder to tell what's happening. So we're going to look at those separately. Looking at all my precision scores, we can see there's a constant, if small, upward trend. However, if we look at the AI scores, there's a pretty clear plateau here. And that's probably because the AI is very good at keeping you at a relatively consistent level. That doesn't mean it doesn't get harder, but as you get better, your score is probably not likely to change. This is probably the expected value. It becomes a lot easier to see improvement if we look at the average over time. If we look at the average precision over time, there's, again, a pretty clear upward trend. If we look at the AI average over time, it's much harder to tell what's going on. This is probably because the AI score starts out high before the AI really knows what your skill level is, and then as it adjusts to your skill level, it makes it more difficult. This means that as it becomes more difficult, your scores get lower. As you get used to the new difficulty and improve yet again, the AI tries to keep you at the same rough amount of score. This means that the AI mode can make it hard to determine if we're actually improving over time. As for SwitchTrack, there's not much to say. It's pretty clear that there's been a huge improvement over time. This is also pretty evident if we look at the average over time, where it seems to just go straight up. CircleTrack keeps the same general trend over time. If we look at it closer, we can see that there are some pretty big jumps between the lowest lows and the highest highs, but over time, it does become more consistent. Finally, we have line trace. This has been one of the hardest ones over time. It feels hard to stay consistent, and if we look at the average over time, we can see that that's pretty true. There are constant peaks and valleys, but it still has a general upward trend. When I started this project, I was curious about using sensitivity randomizers to see if they were beneficial. For those who don't know, a sensitivity randomizer randomizes your sensitivity over time. That means that while you use the mouse, it could get slower, it could get faster. This forces you to adjust on the fly as you use the mouse. The idea behind it is that small, unnoticeable changes can help you build muscle memory faster than a constant variable. Hopefully, that means you get used to controlling your mouse faster and integrate the movements into muscle memory even quicker. I used an aim randomizer for several weeks. Unfortunately, I had to stop using it because it seemed as though it was causing scores in almost everything to regress. In fact, some of you might have even seen, on some of the previous graphs, that there's a dip in roughly the same area on each graph. That was roughly during the time that I determined that it was not worthwhile to continue using a sensitivity randomizer because it simply had no statistical proof for being effective whatsoever. And in fact, if we looked at the numbers, it only seemed to be hurting me. But let's try to make that a little clearer. We've already seen graphs from the most recent set of data I have. Let's look at graphs from roughly around the time when I was still using the randomizer and see how those look in comparison to what we have now. If we look at 6-shot again, we can see that, interestingly enough, there's not really a dip, and it was going up all the while. However, if we look at a different one, such as Spidershot, we can see that there's a pretty clear drop-off in improvement over time. Whereas the precision mode had at least a small upward trend over time, there's almost no change over time in the earlier record, which is roughly when I decided to stop using the sensitivity randomizer. If we look at the AI mode in comparison, we can see that the scores are actively falling. Looking at the SwitchTrack graphs, we can again see that there is significantly less improvement over time. While it might be said that these results are somewhat expected because it is a significantly less amount of time, and therefore scores, it's also clear that one of the biggest drops in consistent scores is near the end of the sensitivity randomizer graph. You can see that same dip in the graph with the larger dataset before a large increase, presumably because I had stopped using the sensitivity randomizer and was now able to train properly. Where the issue becomes most obvious with the sensitivity randomizer, though, is if we look at the average score over time for several different graphs, which unfortunately cannot be compared to day one. This is mostly because I didn't do those tasks on day one, but I began doing those regularly after I made my own playlist. If we look at the average over time for all of these tasks, we can see almost all of them have a big drop at roughly the same point in the graph. The consistent improvement, then, is where I disabled the aim sensitivity randomizer and began to increase my scores again. Now, with all of that said, is there anything we can learn from this? Well, consistency is key. Looking at all of these graphs, it's pretty clear that there's been improvement over time. And while I'm not the best, this improvement seems pretty impressive to me. One last thing I wanted to look at was to compare the average scores at the beginning versus the average scores at the end to see the percentage of improvement. Now this final graph is a quick one I cooked up that shows the percentage improvement of all the major tasks that I've done. As you can see, the vast majority of them have a high percentage improvement rate, many of them hitting 15, if not more, %. The only ones that are negative, or 0, are AI modes, which shows just how hard it is to tell if you're making any progress while using them. So, to summarize, first of all, improvement is a game of consistency. While you might notice big jumps at first, it's impossible to get anywhere truly amazing without consistent effort. Second, the sensitivity randomizer doesn't seem to be beneficial in any notable way, and in fact might even cause you to regress. Third, AI modes are challenging. Certainly do keep up with your improvement. However, this can make it hard to determine if you're actually improving when you play them. I hope you found this interesting. It's definitely been a fun project. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, but otherwise, I hope you have a great day.